Police in Mount Morris, New York, responded to a burglary at the American Hotel restaurant. Cash had been taken, parts of the cash register were missing, surveillance equipment had been removed. As officers followed the route away from the building, they noticed something unusual. There was a trail of macaroni salad. The trail continued through the streets and yards. Officers followed it for a distance, finding dropped items from the burglary along the way. Eventually, the trail led toward a wooded area and became difficult to follow. Hey, I'm Leah, and this is True Crime Culinary, the show where we look at crimes, food, culture, psychology, and the moments that connect them. Okay, did you guess what we're covering today, or were you also envisioning a police dog, nose down, casually just like flicking out their tongue every few steps just to kind of get a little bit of the macaroni? Just me? Okay. I kind of see him looking over his shoulder and wondering if his, what is that called? His guider, his partner, his human partner is watching him. I still think he'd be the goodest dog ever, but it does make me chortle but a smidge thinking about that dog. I was cleaning my pantry and found some dried macaronis and thought, where does that come from? So today we're covering mac and cheese, baby. Because while the burglars left behind a trail of pasta covered in mayonnaise, the macaroni itself has a much longer story and one that I want to dive into. This story starts thousands of years ago, crosses continents, survives months at sea, is refined by presidential chefs, helped feed families during the Great Depression, and eventually becomes one of the most recognizable comfort foods in North America. And man, this story is banana pants. So grab your nudes and let's get cheesy. As it turns out, humans have been combining grains and water into dough for thousands of years. And that's because once you have dough, stretching it, cutting it, or shaping it into pieces can come super natch. How do I know this? I mean, hello China, Italy, Germany even. So wherever there are grains and water, many a folk were independently making different types of noodles throughout different regions of the world. And today when we talk about noodles, we're actually talking about a large family of foods made from different grains. I didn't quite clue into the fact that a lot of what dictates where you find noodles is what they're made of, often telling you what crops grow well in the region. Wheat noodles are common across Europe, Central Asia, Northern China, and the Middle East. Think like spaghetti, linguine, ramen, and hand-pulled wheat noodles. Meanwhile, rice noodles show up where rice agriculture dominates. Think like vermicelli, pho noodles, or pad thai noodles. Then there's durum wheat, which is especially important to our story today. Durum wheat is harder than common wheat, contains more protein, so think like chewier than common wheat, and can be ground into semolina flour. It creates dough that holds its shape and dries successfully. Most dried pasta is made from durum wheat. So one way to think about it is that all pasta is a type of noodle, but not all noodles are pasta. Also a strange fact for me. Some of the earliest known evidence of noodles actually comes from China, where archaeologists discovered noodle-like remains dating back roughly, how many? 4,000 years. That doesn't necessarily mean every noodle traces back to that one invention, but what we can say is that noodle traditions became deeply established throughout Asia and eventually spread westward through trade routes, migration, and cultural exchange. Sidebar, the picture of that really old bowl with the noodle is imagine a face down bowl that over time is filled with dirt. Someone lifts the bowl and then you just see this long snaking noodle on top. And I don't know, I just thought that was such an interest. I mean, can you imagine being that person who found it? So at first, everyone basically ate noodles fresh. Kind of like a lot of other things historically, as humans, we had to figure out first how to make it, then how to make it well, then how to store it without growing an ecosystem around it. Which again, I didn't realize that dried pasta is way more recent than pasta overall. Macaroni, historically, didn't always mean elbow macaroni. For centuries, it referred to various tube-shaped dried pastas. What I did know is that the shape of the pasta is actually usually in service of the sauce or the soup. So that's why you would see something like shell-shaped pasta with a thick sauce. It's there to capture the deliciousness for us. Versus maybe spaghetti with marinara. And so there we just want even coating over every delicious strand. So you want something smooth and long and even. Thus, we can infer that macaroni was intentional. Modern dried macaroni starts with durum wheat. The wheat is milled into a coarse flour called semolina, as I mentioned, and then water is added to create a stiff dough. The hollow center isn't just decorative. It increases the surface area and creates places for sauces to cling, which turns out to be especially useful when your goal is carrying melted cheese. Hooray for us all! Now, I know that when I say pasta, we often think of ye old Italianos. One of the earliest clear records of dried pasta production does come from Sicily in the 1100s. So, in 1154, the geographer, I hope I say this correctly, Muhammad al-Idrisi, described a town called Trabia, that produced large quantities of dried pasta-like strands for export throughout the Mediterranean. We therefore know people were eating pasta and were producing enough to ship it elsewhere. That means the pasta had to survive storage and transportation. And this is one reason Sicily became so important in pasta history, because southern Italy had several advantages. The climate was warm, the air was relatively dry, durum grew well, and pasta could be hung outside and dried naturally. See above. To my point on trying to store food without growing ecosystems often grow where there is humidity. So dry air, huge plus for us. So while northern Italy developed many fresh pasta traditions, southern Italy increasingly specialized in dried pasta. And dried pasta could be stored for months. Sailors could carry it on ships, merchants could transport it between ports, families could keep it on hand for future meals. And in many ways, dried pasta was an early convenience food. So I'm sitting here wondering, how do you even make macaroni tubes? And apparently it's not rolled out the way many people imagine pasta being made. Instead, it's pushed through a metal plate called a die. Think of like a giant Play-Doh machine with like a windshield wiper that kind of cuts the pieces into even lengths. The shape of the holes determine the shape of the pasta. So round holes create spaghetti, flat openings create ribbons, and complex openings create shapes like rotini or shells. Our friend macaroni is made using a ring-shaped opening. As the dough is forced through, it emerges as a hollow tube. The windshield wiper cuts the tube into short pieces, creating the elbow macaroni we're familiar with today. Side note, I watched a number of videos to kind of understand this on the tube's view, but if you want to see a picture, I'll be posting this episode with visual accoutrement in case you just want to watch the old pod. So after shaping, the pasta is carefully dried. Modern manufacturers control temperature and humidity, but the goal is the same as Sicilian pasta makers were pursuing centuries ago. Remove enough moisture that the pasta can survive storage and transport. And that's one reason why dried pasta became so important. Again, it's shelf stable. We love that. Then by the 1600s and the 1700s, dried macaroni was becoming increasingly common in parts of Italy, particularly Naples. Travelers often described seeing pasta sold in the streets. As soon as I see that sentence, I kind of think of like someone opening their coat and being like, you want to get some macaronis? As trade expanded, macaroni slowly spread beyond Italy. And here it is time to tackle one of the most persistent food myths in American history. The myth is that Thomas Jefferson invented macaroni and cheese. Now, first of all, hard no. Recipes combining pasta and cheese existed in Europa centuries before Jefferson was even born. People were fans before the dude even showed up. Second of all, and more importantly, old Jeffo was not the one, I repeat, not the one in the kitchen. Let us review the evidence. While serving as America's minister to France in the 1780s, Jefferson became fascinated, and I put a little note to myself, to fascinated. We mean excited about French food and European pasta dishes. He purchased macaroni, collected information about pasta making equipment. It almost makes me think of like a reconnaissance mission to find out more about mac and cheese. Anyway, he brought back these interests to the United States. But Jefferson also traveled with an enslaved man named James Hemings. Hemings trained in French cuisine while in Paris and became one of the most accomplished chefs in early America. Historians believe he learned to prepare macaroni dishes abroad and later cooked them for Jefferson's guests in the United States. It's one of those moments in food history where the famous name kind of gets remembered over the person who actually did it. So let us rejoice in the truth. Hemings for macaroni! But Hemings wasn't alone. Enslaved black cooks played a massive role in shaping American food traditions. They prepared meals in households, inns, plantations, hotels, and presidential residences. Their techniques, recipes, and labor influenced what eventually became American cuisine, even when their names rarely appeared in historical records. If you want an example of how this can show up, check up Baby Episode 5, The Sweet Potato Silencer, and you'll discover why, depending on where you grew up, you will likely either eat pumpkin pie or sweet potato pie. Back to this story. While Jefferson helped popularize macaroni dishes among wealthy Americans, James Hemings may have been one of the first people serving something recognizable as macaroni and cheese in the United States. As I mentioned, fortunately for mankind, recipes combining pasta and cheese existed in Europe centuries before Jefferson was born. Medieval cookbooks from England and Italy describe versions of the dish. And this is where cheese enters the chat. Specifically, types of cheese, including melty, crumbly, and gooey. They all play a role in historical mac and cheese. Which made me wonder, hey, where does cheese come from? So, cheese. Hella old too. We're talking Neolithic times, like thousands of years BCE in Mesopotamia, or like kind of the bit between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea, is when agriculture starts to become a thing. Farmers then had sheep and goats. Sheep and goats made milk. Milk was in bowls in the sun. Sun made lactic acid in milk get the proteins to buddy up into cheese curds by removing the barrier that usually keeps those proteins from becoming cheese curds. The fastest way you can actually see this in vivo is to take a cup of milk, put in a tablespoon of lemon juice or vinegar, and watch it curdle. That's also a great tip if you don't have buttermilk for a recipe. You can do that instead. Same thing. But at the time, all the Neolithic peeps were like, yum, curds. Cheese is easier to digest and store as curds, so people got really into it. I found a note that some of the earliest Mesopotamian writing is about cheese, and I am so excited. I think I would fit right into that time. Because yes, cheese was a mandatory food for soldiers in ancient Roman rule. Clergymen got crazy with it. They were making all kinds of stuff in their clergy outfits. What's it called? Church? Monastery? Some people were making cheese that was hella stringy. Some people were making cheese that you can put on a grill and it won't even melt. I mean, the options are endless. But from a stringiness perspective, generally speaking, the tighter the protein structure and the drier the cheese, the more crumbly. That's kind of like the easiest way to think about it. So if you have really dry old cheese, you're probably not going to get it to be stringy. It's going to stay crumbly and salty and maybe like nutty. A bit earthy. I watched a minimum of 4 different videos explaining how cheese works, and that overall summary is the best way I can explain it. So, safe to say that old Jeffo did not create mac and cheese. Again, we've got some Neolithic folks making some cheese curds. We've got some peeps all over the world making different types of nudes. Let's just say he wasn't the first. There also wasn't really an official recipe in some of these super early versions. Some versions used cheddar, others used Parmesan, some were baked, others were stirred together on the stovetop. Breadcrumbs appeared in some recipes, cream appeared in others. It often reflected not only what someone could afford, but also what they perceived as more or less fancy. But the common thread was simple. Pasta and cheese rules. Plus, cheese was hella expensive because it easily went bad. On one hand, it was like easier to store than maybe like milk, but it still can go bad, right? We got those little ecosystems. So by the 1800s, manufacturers faced the problem of shipping cheese across countries and oceans. My, what a problem to have. And then the industrial age changed everything, and cheese went from risky to ratchet. In the early 1900s, cheese makers, or I believe they are called cheesemongers, and food manufacturers began experimenting with ways to make cheese more stable and consistent. This led to processed cheese. Now, I don't know what camp y'all fall into when it comes to American cheese slices. There is, of course, camp it's food, and then camp it is plastic adjacent. I am team plastic adjacent. Tell me in the comments what you like, or email me at truecrimeculinary@gmail.com if you have a funny story about American cheese, because I want to hear it. But back to biz. Processed cheese is made by combining cheese with emulsifying salts. What doth that mean? Normally when cheese gets hot, the proteins tighten up and squeeze fat out. That's why some cheese becomes very greasy or separates into oily puddles. And emulsifying salts basically act as referees, and they keep everybody playing together. They don't let anybody separate. They keep the water and fat mixed together instead of breaking apart. And that's why American cheese melts into smooth blankets while other natural cheeses become oily and stringy. Again, did not know that. How much I have learned just from doing research for this epi. Now, apart from industrialization, the Great Depression enters the chat. Huge bummer, because millions of Americans were really hungry and didn't have a lot of money. They were looking for inexpensive meals that could feed families on limited budgets. Then 1937, Kraft is like, let's put this in a box and call it boxed macaroni and cheese. The timing was ideal. Again, pasta inexpensive, cheese shelf stable, product affordable. Hit them with the marketing campaign. Thus, during World War II, rationing further increased its popularity because families could prepare a filling meal without relying heavily on rationed meat. So macaroni and cheese moved from being a homemade dish to a pantry staple. The powdered cheese packet deserves a quick explanation though, because it does seem a little mysterious. How does powder become sauce? Well, the answer is that manufacturers start with real cheese. The cheese is blended with ingredients that help it stay stable. Then moisture is removed from the industrial drying process. So what you're left with is powder containing cheese solids, milk components, fats, proteins, flavor compounds, and emulsifiers. Again, those are the things that help everybody play in the same swimming pool. So when you add milk and butter back in, those ingredients essentially rebuild a cheese sauce, which is kind of wild when you think about it, because Sicily spent centuries figuring out how to remove water from pasta so it could survive transportation. Then food scientists were like, hold my cheese block, and they figured out how to remove water from cheese for some of the same reasons. And today, mac and cheese exists in dozens, nay hundreds of forms. There are boxed variations, restaurant versions, frozen versions, luxury versions made with aged cheese, perhaps a lobster claw. I don't know. Bacon? Love me some of that. You've got regional variations, family recipes, and then in Canada, Kraft Dinner became so popular that it developed its own cultural identity. Canadians consume millions of boxes every year and are often cited among the world's highest per capita consumers of boxed macaroni and cheese. May I just say congratulations. In the United States, macaroni and cheese consistently ranks among the country's most popular comfort foods. Can understand and relate. So what began as a preserved pasta product crossing the Mediterranean eventually became a weeknight dinner, a holiday side dish, and a staple of college dorms and family gatherings. Whew! Okay, but remember our police friends who went into the woods following a macaroni trail with the imaginary dog that I put into that scene? Well, later that day, police arrested 3 suspects and recovered stolen property. According to investigators, these suspects had also taken a large bowl of macaroni salad and appeared to have been eating it as they left the scene. I mean, come on, that is preposterous. The suspects faced charges related to the break-in. I love the idea that they're running through the woods and just like sticking their hands into this bowl of macaroni salad and just like, no, we gotta keep going. But the suspects faced charges related to the break-in and theft, which means that while macaroni spent centuries helping feed families, macaroni salad briefly became a crime-fighting agent. That's it for this week's True Crime Culinary. Thanks for listening and see you next week. Until next time, stay curious and be careful what's in your cup. Check out our show notes for sources, hit that subscribe button, rate and review the podcast anywhere you listen.